Michael Eugene Cantrall's poem, titled "The Master May Not Hear," operates directly as a mechanism of complete psychological confinement. It was conceived entirely within the parameters of an exercise called the Argue Against Yourself contest. The rules of this provocation required writers to adopt a philosophical stance directly opposed to their own convictions and argue it with total, unwavering sincerity. Cantrall isn't an agnostic. Yet, to execute the prompt, he chose to inhabit an agnostic persona, forcing his narrative voice to confront the absolute, chilling silence of a graveyard without the safety net of personal faith. To understand how he achieves this, we cannot simply summarize the verses. We have to hear the cadence exactly as it forces itself upon the reader. The poem is built as a structural trap, and to recognize its edges, we must first experience the relentless rhythm of the primary text in its entirety. The rest appears unending, in cemeteries far and near. May a master know what's pending. For those thought to be transcending, below the walk is what I fear. The rest appears unending. Reposed, a temporary suspending. In sleep that's neither here nor there. May a master know what's pending. For what I'm clearly comprehending is a fear of which I swear. The rest appears unending. How will souls some way be ascending, receiving supremely rendered care? May a master know what's pending. What's the point of any pretending, if we are destined for nowhere? The rest appears unending. May a master know what's pending. Cantrall openly documented his struggle with this structure. Before this version succeeded, he worked through 7 failed iterations of the poem, nearly abandoning the effort entirely. That technical exhaustion on the part of the writer is the perfect vehicle for the subject matter. The grueling, repetitive labor required to execute a villanelle mirrors the exhausting labor of the agnostic soul, attempting over and over to find a logical pathway to faith and failing. Notice how the 2 A lines function. Every time the middle B line attempts to introduce linear movement or a new thought, the mandatory return of an A refrain forces the reader immediately back to the original premise. Linear progression is structurally impossible. This creates a state of prosodic claustrophobia. The narrator's existential fear is literally boxed in by the rules of the meter. This architecture of entrapment holds the speaker hostage within their own mental loop. Receive this stasis immediately in the first refrain. The rest appears unending. The critical weight of that sentence rests on the word appears. This is a purely epistemological judgment. The narrator isn't relying on theology. They rely on the visual silence and the heavy physical reality of the stone they can see in front of them. In traditional funerary settings, rest is offered as a comfort, a peaceful transition. By anchoring rest to what physically appears, the narrator strips away the comfort, rendering the concept as a terrifying, static vacancy. This feeds into the second refrain, "May a master know what's pending." There is a deep, agonizing tension here between the title of the poem, which suggests the master may not hear, and the refrain's plea that a master may. The text then contrasts spatial directions. It points to the traditional hope of those thought to be transcending, a hopeful upward mobility. But the narrator rejects that vertical escape. Their focus remains locked on the subterranean. Below the walk is what I fear. By grounding the anxiety in the soil beneath the cobblestone, years after publication, Cantrall returned to the text. On May 22, 2026, he adjusted the typography, capitalizing the first letters of stanzas 1, 2, 4, and 5. But the next morning, on May 23rd, he escalated this adjustment, choosing to capitalize the beginning of every single line. This is an archaic formatting choice, but highly effective. It squares off the left margin of the poem, forcing the text into a dense, rigid visual block on the page. These edits weaponize grammar and punctuation as architectural tools, building a visual wall around the reader. This brings us to the central interpretive question of the text. Whose consciousness is actually experiencing this endless cycle? The primary reading suggests a living observer, a pedestrian walking the path, looking down at the graves, wrestling with their own doubts as they survey the cemeteries far and near. But the spatial obsession with what lies below the walk invites a much darker interpretation. that the speaker is a consciousness already trapped beneath the soil, experiencing this frozen stillness firsthand. The text offers 0 definitive pronouns or context clues to confirm either identity. This lack of definition is a literary device known as intentional ambiguity. It is a deliberate choice to withhold footing. Because the poem refuses to validate a single correct reading, it pushes the audience into an epistemological void. We cannot know who is speaking, just as the speaker cannot know what comes next. By keeping the identity unresolved, Cantrall transfers the precise anxiety of the agnostic directly onto whoever is reading the text. All of these structural pressures converge in the poem's climax, the final quatrain. Throughout the first 5 stanzas, the 2 refrains operate independently, kept apart by lines of intense inquiry. But here, the villanelle's rules require those independent refrains to couple. They are forced into a single, inescapable unit. The question if we are destined for nowhere is answered by the locked lines. The rest appears unending. May a master know what's pending. There is no epiphany at the end of this poem. It deliberately denies the reader any comforting release of tension. The narrator's sharpest inquiry into the futility of pretending is instantly neutralized by the form. This question of being destined for nowhere is swallowed by the return of the cycle. This is the poem's greatest technical achievement. It takes the inherent tedium of the villanelle and turns it into a profound mechanism for existential struggle. The text provides no definitive answers about the divine. It leaves the speaker in a state of permanent oscillation between observation and fear. And we are left looking at the sensory reality of the cemetery, the physical proof of the trap. The poem proves that the exhausting, cyclical weight of not knowing is the only unending rest we can truly confirm.